Well, hello. Welcome to my very first podcast. This is exciting. I am Sally Jerney of Sally Jerney Quilts, and you can check me out on Instagram.
How do you spell that?
Sally, SALLYJERNEY Quilts. And I've been having a lot of fun with Instagram and now watching my daughter and her friend at Caddy Jack's Knits.
Mm-hmm.
They've been doing podcasts now and are having so much fun with it. And I'm getting to that point in my life, I've quilted since 1976, I believe, that it's time to share my stories. Everybody keeps asking me, which is just such a flattering, wonderful thing when people ask me my stories. And I recognize that in getting to almost 70, my next birthday is 70, and having myself be the matriarch of my family, like my mother is passed and my grandmother and all the women, have gone before me. And so now it's time to pass my stories down. And quilting is my passion. Quilting is definitely my passion. And I've been doing it for, like I said, since 1976. But seriously, I am kind of a maverick, independent quilter. I haven't belonged to quilting groups. I haven't belonged to guilds. I come out and I like to see what other people are doing. But for the most part, because I am in a multi-generational household, I live with both my daughters and my two grandsons, and that keeps me very busy. And so when I'm doing, and I'm kind of the person that does the cooking and that kind of thing. I love it. But I also
And the bread baking.
and the bread baking and those kinds of things. Yes, that's what I do. And so my grandsons come in and say, "We need cookies for class tomorrow," and they tell me that about 9 o'clock at night. So it keeps me busy. So I'm one of those. I don't even think of myself as a senior at this point, but I'm up late, up early, all those kinds of things, and I fit quilting around in the same time. But anyway, I've been having this series of quilts that I realize have started. I think of them as my Grandma Johnson quilt stories. And Grandma Johnson for me is my grandmother's grandmother. So that takes us back quite a few generations. I didn't know her, obviously. I did know my great grandmother, which was her daughter. So I knew her for a short period in my life. But anyway, enough to know that she was kind of a stern, strict, a little bit overbearing, and kind of scary, frankly. So I always, my great grandmother, I was always like, whoa, when she'd come around. But I've started to really, in my quilting, I get that pause. I do all my quilting, the stitching by hand. And so I get the time to think. It's my processing story time, and those go into my quilts. That's what, I always say my quilts are full of the life that I'm living right now. But at this stage in my life, I'm thinking back, and I'm realizing that I had this Dresden Plate quilt that was it wasn't a sandwich quilt, it was just the Dresden Plate top. And my mother gave it to me back when I was probably in my 30s and said, this was Grandma Johnson's quilt that she made. And at the time, I was,
Is that it behind you there?
That's this is one of the blocks from it. Yes, it's a Dresden Plate. Very familiar, 30s fabrics, the bubblegum pink center. But what I'm almost embarrassed to share with you, because I've become so much wiser since then, but back in that day, I kind of looked at that quilt, and I loved traditional quilts in my 30s, and I would go, look at them, and you go to antique shops, and just always coveting them. But my Grandma Johnson's quilt did not cut it as far as I was concerned on technique, overall design. There's so many things that were wrong about it, But the main thing is that her centers were so just not, it didn't even look like she'd used a circle template. They were very wacky, off center, so I mean, I just always kind of like, oh, thanks, Mom, but I folded it up and kind of put it away. Well, about 10 years ago, I made this realization that I had Grandma Johnson's quilt and I had Aunt Bess's quilt that were both unfinished projects. And I decided, since I'm the quilt artist and I love to work with clothes, with people's fabric that has history and story and some type of meaning to it. I don't like to just go buy a stack of fabrics and make a quilt. So most of my quilts have stories. I would say probably all of them do. But anyway, so I made this decision to just use the fabric in those quilts, in my quilts, because it was a way of passing it on. I knew I was never going to finish quilting.
Do you have the Aunt Bess's quilt? I was just looking for it.
I don't have the fit,
I mean, the way you reused it.
It's on my bed. It's right underneath the laundry. It's kind of,
Keep talking.
Aunt Bess's quilt is always, I use that every night as a matter of fact. But anyway, the Dresden plates, I just decided to use the fabric because the 30s fabric is very charming. It's, feed sack. We all are probably pretty familiar with it. And some, I found that I really liked it when I cut them up into little pieces like I like to use in my quilts. So
Is this it?
that's it.
Can I just
Sure. This is the quilt that I cut up, Aunt Bess's quilt, which I can talk about it another time, but that's kind of what I do is I hacked up her diamonds, rearranged them. They fell into this star pattern and I love that quilt. That's like one of my favorites. So it's just a little quilt that I have on my bed. I would never part with that one. So, but that's what I did. I decided I'm going to use the fabric that I have of these women that, are in my family and use it in my quilts. So one of the first things I did with the Dresden Plate is I decided to make my mother a Christmas card quilt, which was just a tiny little thing. But she was always very difficult to figure out what to give her for Christmas. And so I made this fun little quilt. And this is what, I don't know how to do this, but this little book, that was, because I did this probably about 10 or 11 years, it was maybe 10 years ago, and this was one of the boys' Christmas books. It's poems by E. Cummings, and it's written and illustrated by Chris Rochek, and he got the Caldecott Award in 2006. So
he always loved being the multi-generational grandma with access to picture books.
Right, and I loved it because this was an inspiration at that time. I was doing a lot of quilts that were based on children's books, and see all these pointy, lovely, beautiful. Anyway, these trees, I just loved them.
Yeah.
I love the colors. I love, it was, so anyway, I decided to make her this Christmas quilt, and I have replicated it. Unfortunately, the Christmas quilt is in a little car, and it's smaller than this, is in the Christmas stuff. So when I get it out, I'll keep it with this. But anyway, it's something like this. I just cut up the Dresden plates into little triangles because they, little triangle trees. It just worked. It was like wow, I can make trees. And what is so wonderful about this that I didn't even realize back in 2010, I think is when I did this, on hers it had Merry Christmas and it had more buttons. And I love using, these vintage buttons. But what I didn't even think about then, that I have noticed now, is this entire Dresden plate was sewn by hand. She put the the little petals were put together by hand, the plates were sewn down by hand, the wacky little imperfect circle was done by hand. And Grandma Johnson, this is what happens after your mother dies. You don't get a chance to get the stories anymore. But Grandma Johnson was always, the story around her was that she was this Norwegian farm woman, worked hard all of her life. And then I think when she was widowed, and I'm not, I'll know better when I look into these dates, but she lived with my mother and, my grandmother. So it was her granddaughter that she lived with. And I believe when she made this quilt, she was perhaps at the very end of her life, which explains why everything's a little wacky. And she was probably dying of cancer at that time because she wouldn't have had time to sit down and do this if she didn't have something making her giving her the time to sit down and do this. Because we all know women back in those days didn't get a lot of time to sit down and hand sew things. Anyway, I mean they did, but it was always a struggle to find the time. But anyway, so Grandma Johnson's story, according to my mother, is that Grandma Johnson was a very kind, loving, wonderful grandma. My mother adored her. She said she spoiled her. She can remember when she was sick that she'd lay in bed with her and talk with her. And, my mother just loved her deeply. And it wasn't until recently when I started working in these, I had the Christmas box out last year and I decided, oh, I love those little, where did that quilt go? And I pulled it out and I decided to start replicating that again. And that's where this series is coming from, is I'm just crazy about these little trees and little circles. And, I had made, between then and now, I made a couple of quilts where I used, I'm trying to show you that I made quilts where I used these as blocks, these little pieces. And my niece has that now in her office in Washington, D.C., as a matter of fact. So it's kind of using them as pieces. I love them, because I could showcase the gorgeous, my appreciation of this fabric has increased. My appreciation of her hand stitching has increased. So anyway, I started doing the replicas of the Christmas card, and I can show you a few of them.
Did we show this one already?
We showed that one, but anyway, here is a whole rendition of the ones that I have completed. I'll turn that up. Here's the...
I'm going to show the front and back.
Okay, I love backs. So as you can see on the back of that one, there was a little piece of fabric that got caught in there when I was
here.
I love that. I love, when things happen, it's exciting to me. It makes it interesting. I like when they're, and on the original Christmas card one that I made for my mother, I had used the machine and did a zigzag stitch around because I liked how that looked with stitching. Now that I'm recognizing that by doing the zigzag stitch, I'm kind of covering up Grandma Johnson's stitches. And so I'm not going to do...
Put one up in here so you can see
those are the adorable ones. My stitches are in the tree, but when you see little white thread, and there's lots of little places where knots have come through, and you have to look at them up close. But each one of those has a fun backing, and it's just...
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. The backing on that one is...
I made a bag out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Let me go back to the backings on these. I don't... Did I...
But anyway, the process
One more.
was... Okay, sorry.
More.
We have more, believe me, because I'm going, I love these, and I'm just having... So what I did was, and you can see the block back here, I decided, whoa, I better do... I unfortunately didn't take a picture of the whole quilt, which I regret. But, I've done that. But I decided to save one of the blocks whole, and I quilted it the way it would be intended probably to be quilted, so that there you can say it's a Dresden Plate. This is where all this has come from. And I love that. So that's there. But a lot of my quilting ideas come from, I sleep on them at night and they come to me, and in the morning I woke up and I'm going like, oh my God, what about all those wacky little pink centers that I've forgotten, they're just in the pile there, and because I'm doing all these trees. And I had this vision of all these circles lined up in a row, and just to document her beautiful, which I came to realize were imperfect, beautiful circles. I mean, I apologize, Grandma, for any derogatory remarks or thoughts I had about your stitching, because it's just gorgeous. But what the main thing that struck me, and it just struck me like lightning bolt, was that these fabrics, and Jackie will help me put this up. This is what I did with the circles as I placed them in a
Just
row.
want you to see the dimensionality of how they are.
Just an absolutely simple presentation. That's a little Liberty of London on the back, because I love those on the back. Just a simple presentation to keep them. And then when I realized, when I was saying to my grandsons, touch this fabric, just touch this fabric, Joe, and recognize that the stitches that are in here were put in by your great-grandmother, who they love dearly. That's my mother. Their great-grandmother's great-grandmother. And it's just like, that's really something. And Joe's going like, wow. It's a tangible thing that you can reach across and go, Grandma Bertha Johnson, little Norwegian, because she was kind of built like me, actually. A little short and round person. That was Grandma Johnson. Anyway, so what I realized when I got this all done was that it actually represents the 6 generations on the female line here. It doesn't include the grandsons because they are not female, but it's Grandma Johnson, Gertrude, which is
hold it up a little higher.
This is Gertrude, who my mother was named after, the stern Victorian school teacher who had quite the
I didn't know she was a teacher.
Yeah, she had quite the life. She's the one that had 3 husbands and was almost poisoned. That's her.
Okay.
And then this is Alice, which is my beloved grandmother, Alice Morrison Brandt. And then this is my mother, who was named Gertrude after, and she hated her name, which she's beloved. And then this is my little circle. And then this is Jamie and Jackie in this generation, which I think is just awesome. That, because I didn't think about, I have one more circle.
Serendipitously arrived.
It just arrived at that. And I don't know if you want me to share with that.
What?
Oh, that this happens to be special fabric
Sure, you
also.
can, of course.
This is Jackie's wedding dress, which she gave to me because it's absolutely the most joyful making of,
and I am since divorced, but it's nice to be able to use the fabric and embrace it as part of the life too.
And it was this beautiful young woman made the dress for her, and we picked out the fabric and we loved it. So I've been putting that, it's a cotton silk, and whenever I can use it anyway. But that's that. So I have, I have this basket, which is what I love doing with these things, is there's just, tons of these little things ready for me to take out into the world. Oh, I know, I want to show you the works in progress. So I won't, these are the building blocks of that. But works in progress, I started, like with anything, what I wanted to do was to expand a little bit. So I found that when I cut up the triangles, it was leaving a lot of yarn, a lot of fabric that didn't get used. So these are works in progress, still needing to be bound, but I'll let you show them the backing of that. I've cut circles, so I'm going to do a lot of designs with circles because I love circles. They were, that's kind of like moon cycles, or, the way the fabric cuts into the, anyway, they are, that there's going to be a lot more circles coming.
Gorgeous.
And I love the shape, that rectangular. And then this particular tree, I love that tree. So these are, you have to remember these are just works in progress. They're not bound yet, which I think makes a big difference. It's like putting a frame. But I love the pink on that one. And so I decided to use that last circle up there, because I don't want to waste any of them. I've got a couple of them that are, but that beautiful bubble gum, that's a Liberty of London. So then there's a stack of, I'll show you this one. This was putting the circle into the treescapes. So there's So those still need to be framed.
And these are all hand quilted.
Yes.
What kind of thread do you use? Because even the thread is
the
iridescent
thread is
and beautiful
sulky.
and changes colors.
It's this, and I just love it. It's sulky,
I love this
blendable.
too.
I think it's a 12 weight, so it's got a nice heavy feel to it. It's a little bit finer, of course.
Oh, they're gorgeous.
But it just adds sparkle and
Yeah,
interest.
I'm just sorry. I'm just gonna flash them because looking in your basket, look.
I know.
lovely those are.
And they're fun to. They are a little bit of a challenge because they break often, but I'm fine with that. And then those are.
You want me to go through this? Okay.
Yes.
So
these are just kind of they fall into how I'm gonna. It just adds more interest. I actually have a sale coming up that or a holiday fair, and I thought I would share with the world. I would put some of Grandma Johnson's trees out into the world.
this is a shirt I recognize.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just showing.
Yeah, feel that. I mean, it's just.
Yeah, it's just
It's a
worn shirt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for us, we can go. Oh, I remember the quilt that
Yes,
that
and
was
there's
in.
your
And these were a wedding gift. His
From
and her.
Jamie.
Yeah, and then.
So this is the story of Grandma Johnson's quilts and how they're going to be, out into the world. I have lots of little pieces of, things yet to work on, which I love that. Isn't that gorgeous?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't, I could go on and on, but do you have any questions or am I?
Well, I'm just wondering, at this point, you do sell quilts.
I do.
And this is just one sort of
Oh, this is only
one
this
tiny
is one
facet.
tangent on
But
my-
so do you plan to do these podcasts
Oh,
again?
I would love to because
Yeah.
I have so many stories. I have another group of quilts that I call my mostly white quilts that are, I've been using heirloom, family tablecloths and napkins and handkerchiefs, those kinds of things, pockets. I would love to just share quilts that.
Yeah. Well, can I also speak
Sure.
to just the latest iteration of quilting for you has been discovering Instagram and this new platform of YouTube. I'm just going to throw in there that, to subscribe and comment below because I think what you're looking for, why don't you speak to
Well, what I'm thinking about is that because this is such an important part of my life and we're all, I hate to say this, but we all are ephemeral. We're ephemeral. Who knows how long we're going to be here? And it's a way of sharing with my grandsons or whoever goes beyond there. They can say, oh, that's Grandma Sally. Grandma Sally's quilts. I remember those. And anybody else out there, because there's so many people that have been so encouraged with Instagram, the numbers of young women, I'm sure there's young men too, but mostly I'm following young women who are out there. I have to put a shout out to Heidi Parks, as a matter of fact, because she is one of those young women that I am so thrilled to see her work out in the world. Because she does stories in fabric and hand stitches, and she just has such a heart. And I met her at Blue Bar Quilts when she had her quilts there. So I'm just inspired with what people are doing, but I'm also recognizing that as I'm commenting on people's feeds, people that say, oh, I just don't know whether I should have these imperfect stitches out showing to the world. And I'm just going like, Grandma Johnson's stitches are imperfect, but I sure am pretty damn happy that nobody disposed of her quilt because it was imperfect. I'm so happy to be able to pass it along. So keep your imperfect, perfect, whatever, that language doesn't really help. Just keep creating, because it's sustained me for, I have so many stories and so, hardships and joys and everything. It's all in the fabric. And, I guess that's a good place to let this podcast go, is that just keep the stories coming. And I have a lot of them, and if you're interested, I may just keep doing this just for myself and for my family, but I would love to share them too.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm this disembodied voice, but I do want to echo that. I mean, the stories that you are temporal and that these generations of women, I think the storytelling seems to me so important right now, the voices. And that's what I'm excited for your podcast, to hear those tales and have them be out there and not have it just be a product, but be a product with a soul. Because your work, you tune in, because this is just the tip. Her work is amazing. So please do comment below, and we are encouraging Mom to set up an Etsy shop or something like that. But she will be at Madison Chocolate Company again for
December 1st is when Megan Heil, she's planning to have a whole range of creative people there too.
Yeah.
And it's fun. So it's fun just to go and share. It's all people locally.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And for now, goodbye.